Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the true story of the Rosetta Stone. Now, we've all heard the term, right? It's the ultimate translation key, our go-to cultural shorthand for decoding the impossible. But the actual story of how its three distinct scripts provided a reliable bridge into ancient Egyptian history, it is so much more than just a famous rock. It's this fascinating, wild saga of political maneuvering, accidental discovery, and just absolute painstaking obsession that fundamentally reshaped our understanding of the human past. Think about it like a slow-burn detective story that spans literally thousands of years. For centuries, the language of the pharaohs was completely unreadable. It was nothing more than dead symbols on ruined monuments, guarding secrets that absolutely no one alive could comprehend. So how on earth did a single broken slab covered in weathered marks manage to unlock an entire ancient civilization? Well, to answer that, we have to trace the journey of this object all the way from its creation to its translation. To give us a cognitive map of this incredible journey, let's look at three massive historical leaps. First up, 196 BC, when the decree was originally carved. Then we take a staggering jump of nearly 2 millennia to 1799, when the slab was suddenly discovered. And finally, the 19th century, when those scripts were actually deciphered. It is truly wild to think that this artifact just sat there, completely unnoticed in the dirt, for nearly 2,000 years before changing history forever. It's really easy to picture this object as just some generic rock, but the physical reality of it is actually crucial. This is granodiorite. It's a heavy, dark, exceptionally coarse-grained stone. It's imposing, and it is incredibly dense. This wasn't meant to be temporary, and it certainly wasn't a rough draft. It was chosen specifically because whoever carved it wanted this message to survive for generations. What we have today is really just a surviving, broken piece of what would have been a much larger, monumental stela standing tall in a temple. So the story officially kicks off during that first leap back in 1960 BC. Ptolemaic Egyptian priests and scribes prepared a formal decree. I really want you to imagine this scene for a second. Scribes sweating in the Egyptian heat, working with historically grounded, heavy tools, carefully preparing to carve a highly formalized message into this massive, dark stone. This wasn't just casual writing, and it wasn't a piece of ancient poetry. This was an official, legally binding, highly important state document that needed to be absolutely perfect. But why go to all this trouble? Well, the decree was created specifically to confirm honors for the young ruler Ptolemy V. It wasn't some mystical religious prophecy or a map to hidden gold. In modern terms, it was essentially ancient public relations. The priests needed to formally declare and record these honors for their 13-year-old king. They were ensuring that the entire kingdom recognized his authority, his divine right to rule, and the specific tax breaks and respects being paid to him and the temples. Now here is a super common misconception. People very often assume the stone contains three completely different texts. Actually, scratch that. It doesn't. The stone contains the exact same priestly decree repeated across three completely different writing systems. One message, three ways of writing it. And that redundancy, that is the absolute key to everything that follows. If it had been three different texts, or even just slightly varied messages, the stone would have remained a beautiful but entirely useless doorstop. The repetition is literally what makes it a skeleton key. So why write the exact same thing three times? Well, it brilliantly illustrates a highly stratified multicultural society. You see, each script served a very specific societal function in Ptolemaic Egypt. Right at the top, you have hieroglyphs, which were strictly for formal and priestly use, basically the language of the gods. In the middle, you have Demotic for everyday Egyptian communication. And at the bottom, ancient Greek, which served the kingdom's ruling administration. By carving the same decree in all three scripts, the priests made sure that the religious elites, the commoners, and the Greek-speaking rulers were all quite literally on the same page. Let's pause on Demotic for just a second, because it adds a really fascinating layer of depth here. While hieroglyphs were the formal, sacred carvings you'd see on massive temple walls, Demotic was the everyday script. It was what ordinary people used for contracts, writing letters, and just common day-to-day communication. You can kind of think of it as the missing link between the sacred world of the priests and the administrative world of the Greek state. Having Demotic right alongside those formal hieroglyphs was absolutely essential for spreading the decree's message across everyday Egyptian society. Okay, now we hit our massive time jump. Fast forward to 1799, when this broken slab was dramatically pulled from the sands near Rashid, a port city that Europeans knew as Rosetta. Just consider the contrast here for a minute. a monumental decree meant to echo through eternity, had spent centuries just sitting silently in the earth. Its unreadable marks were hiding in plain sight, completely ignored by empires that were rising and falling all around it, until a totally accidental unearthing finally brought it back into the light of history. The really funny thing about this monumental discovery is that it wasn't made by some swashbuckling archaeologist on a targeted dig. Nope. It was actually found by a group of French soldiers serving under Napoleon. They were literally just doing basic construction work, moving earth and stones to strengthen some rough fort masonry in the Nile Delta for military defense. They were just looking for structural rubble, and instead they stumbled upon this broken, dark piece of granodiorite that would completely alter the trajectory of human history. Once the stone was dusted off and recognized for what it actually was, the real work began. Now, scholars in the early 19th century couldn't read the hieroglyphs at the top, and they definitely couldn't read the Demotic in the middle. But they could read the ancient Greek at the bottom perfectly. It was, quite literally, the scholar's bridge. Imagine the eureka moment they must have had. Because they knew all three bands contained the exact same decree, that Greek text suddenly provided a flawless, reliable translation of a language that hadn't been spoken in 2 millennia. As you can see, the decipherment was a really meticulous, step-by-step mechanical process. I mean, we're talking about hunching over paper rubbings under dim lamplight for years. First, they read the ancient Greek text. Then, they used that Greek text to identify repeated names, like Ptolemy, in the unknown scripts. By counting the number of times a name appeared in the Greek, and then finding a cluster of symbols that repeated the exact same number of times in the hieroglyphs, they could slowly start to map known letters to unknown symbols. It was essentially a massive, high-stakes logic puzzle. And this rigorous comparison work wasn't just a solo endeavor. It was a brutal, intellectual grind that spanned years. It depended heavily on the brilliant and often rival minds of scholars like Thomas Young in England and Jean-François Champollion in France. You can think of it as a massive international relay race. Young made these crucial early breakthroughs in identifying that the hieroglyphs were actually phonetic, but it was Champollion who really took the baton, applying his vast knowledge of Coptic to finally crack the entire grammatical system wide open. We often use the term Rosetta Stone today to mean a quick, instant translation matrix, but historically speaking, it was definitely not a magic dictionary. There was no sudden, overnight translation where everything just magically made sense. Rather, it was a shared reference point that took decades of grueling work to become a functional, workable reading system. It provided the foundational clues, for sure, but scholars still had to agonizingly rebuild the grammar, the syntax, and the vocabulary of a completely dead language totally from scratch. Ultimately, comparing these specific scripts on this single, completely accidental piece of granodiorite was the breakthrough that helped restore our ability to read ancient Egyptian writing. By bridging ancient Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs, this one bureaucratic priestly decree from 1906 BC did the impossible. It literally gave humanity its voice back to the ancient Egyptians, allowing us to finally read their history, their poetry, and their most profound beliefs in their own words. History is just full of lingering mysteries waiting for their own Rosetta Stone. We've unlocked the words of the pharaohs, but there is still so much left unread across the globe, from the Indus Valley script to Linear A. So I'll leave you with this. Which undeciphered writing system do you think scholars should solve next? Because as we've learned today, perhaps the next great breakthrough isn't lost forever. It might just be waiting in the dirt right now.